We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome. All of our members are here. Public comments on non-agenda items.
Thank you, Nancy Scarborough. Some of you may be aware that there's been a lawsuit filed against the city from Barbara Salvini, who's the HR director, and she's alleging that the city's position regarding the noise element was that as it was presented to the land use, ALEC, land use, whatever, committee, is inaccurate. And I'm wondering if it's inaccurate, what that would do to our housing element and our general plan.
I'm not quite up to speed on that. I was only made aware of the Voice OC article, but have not delved into the details. So I don't know if I'm really prepared to comment on that at this time.
You're stating the lawsuit's based on the noise and ALEC?
No, the lawsuit is as the Human Resources Director is suing, or actually it's a complaint against the city for all kinds of, stuff that she's alleging that they, discriminated against her, sidelined her, whatever. But in one of the comments, they say the plaintiff is informed and believes a noise study used to support the city's position is inaccurate. This is a concern because the city appears to be basing its actions on an inaccurate noise report that could have significant impact on the city of Newport Beach residences and businesses.
And that's part of the lawsuit?
That is in the lawsuit, yeah. So I guess it's gonna end up being a part of what has to be discussed and addressed. But aside from the lawsuit, the fact that it's out there that this is being alleged as being inaccurate concerns me. And I just think that we need to ask the city attorney, or
We will. We're going to get a lot more information on this, but I'm sure that the staff, by the next Gpusc meeting, will have at least some information on that and how it might affect
Sure, I'd be glad to
what's
better.
been happening. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Any other? That was an interesting one. Any other public comments on non-agenda items? All right. Motion to approve the minutes?
motion.
Second.
All right. Any comments from the public? All right. Yes.
Yeah. I read the minutes and they're very good and thorough, but one tiny little correction on page 3 of 4. There's a bunch of paragraphs just above the one about Coyote Canyon. On the last 2 lines of that, it's referring to exchange of feedback between the boards, commissions, and subcommittees and a subcommittee. I actually looked at the video. It's supposed to say feedback between the boards, commissions, and committees, or even clearer, the city's boards, commissions, and committees, and a subcommittee.
All right. To prove it with that amendment?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Minutes stand approved. Thank you, Jim. All right. A review of the noise subcommittee memo?
Yes, this was really just more of a procedural. At every steering committee meeting, we do talk about the previous Gpusc meeting, and at that meeting, the focus was on the noise subcommittee's work, and we are grateful to have the chair's presence here, and as public comments, he can provide additional commentary if needed, but the noise subcommittee has been working diligently to work in the absence of a formal consultant for support, but looking to identify policies and goals that could be warranting a refresh, and has further been looking into noise complaint data provided by the city's police department and code enforcement division, and is diligently again meeting. I believe we met twice already this month. So looking at trying to identify again goals and policies that could warrant a discussion. And at minimum, we're looking to prepare a better structure for the elements, and that's something that Elizabeth with DUDEC will talk about later in this meeting. And also at that meeting, while the noise subcommittee was all that was, the memo from the noise subcommittee is all that was attached, the GPAC got a guest presentation from Tony Petros. Chair Gardner was gracious in coordinating that. I think most of the GPAC found it very interesting, if not all of them. And then we also talked a lot about the workshop content and what would be shared at the workshops in November and December. I will leave it at that, and I'm happy to elaborate on anything you'd like.
Anybody from the Noise Committee want to add anything to that?
Chair Gardner has been attending our subcommittee meetings, so I think she's very familiar with what's going on. For the other two members of the steering committee, part of this involves a contract, and I think it's important to note only half of the contract has to do with supporting the noise subcommittee. The other half is DUDEC is wanting extra compensation to attend any more subcommittee meetings. And I believe that's more than half of the dollar amount is for that. And at the GPAC meeting where we recommended the contract, one of the big thrusts of it was to update the noise contours. And subsequent to the meeting where we asked for that, I discovered actually that noise contours had been evaluated in the EIR for the housing element adoption. So it's unclear and still in flux how much DUDEC wants to add to that activity. The noise contours were computed for all of the city streets with the exception of the 73 freeway and toll road, but it's not clear how far into the future those were projected. So the DUDEC has a starting point, doesn't have to start completely, perhaps as much as they thought they were going to need to do. So thank you.
Obviously, given what the stated in the lawsuit, all this may be evaluated. We'll have to see. But I do want to commend the noise subcommittee. Their members have gone out, and as you'll see, they've done some really great work in looking at different cities' general plans and brought information back, which has been very helpful. They've done a great job. Any other comments on the noise subcommittee? Or this? All right, go ahead.
So I did prepare two slides that are just more visual, but wanted to make sure the steering committee knows we did conduct 4 community workshops between November and December. These are in reverse order. So the most recent one we had was for the land use, harbor bay, and beaches elements, and then the rest are following in sequence that I won't read them for you. Wanted to just share some photos from the most recent workshop, which I believe all of us who attended the workshops would agree this was the most successful in terms of attendance. They all had great input received from the community members that were in attendance, but this one definitely had a very good vibe to it in terms of the participants. Everyone had a good energy and everyone was participating very actively. So the photographs there I think are nice to look at, good visuals. In particular, the vision statement on the left, you'll see there are blue dots that have been placed next to the statements that they're sentences of the statement that community members aligned with the most. And so I think that was a pretty nice exercise. And at the top right, you'll see community members rotating on tables, looking at maps of the different focus areas from the housing element and identifying what needs to be provided to ensure there's a balanced community there. Ultimately, all of the activity from the workshops will be synthesized by DUDEC and Cairns and West and provided in a recap document that will be shared with the steering committee and the GPAC. And so I just wanted to provide sort of a teaser of this is what's happened. I know Chair Gardner attended all of the workshops, so I don't know if you want to provide any comments therein, but I'll stop here and I'm available for questions.
Well, I did attend all 4. The first 2, I think we had 1 or 2 visitors. It was very, very small, plus a couple of GPAC members. So comments were good, but there wasn't really a lot of exchange. It was disappointing. The first one was right after the election, and everyone thought it was just like, I don't want to think about anything that might have to do with government. The third one, we got maybe a half dozen people. But the last one was an interesting combination because most of the people were there for the harbor and bay element. They had really done a great job of getting the work out. Kurt Black, the head of that, had talked to the Harbor Commission and some yacht clubs, and they sent the word out. What was, to me, the most valuable part of that was that all of those harbor and bay people stayed for the land use aspect, and we got a bunch of perspectives I don't think we would have gotten any other way, because the land use people tend to go to the land use ones, and and here were a bunch of people that had been exposed to almost none of this and were coming at it fresh, and they got very involved, and I can't wait to see the final things. I was just looking at some of the comments. One, for example, just as someone was talking about West Newport Mesa, and I just sort of overheard, like, well, why not go a bit high-rise there? Because, you've got Hogue's already high-rise, and I think, well, no, we hadn't heard something like that. So that kind of different comment was great. I'm sorry we didn't get more, because that one was, you said, if we could have had 4 like that, it would have been so invaluable. Just so much conversation and good questions, but, you can send the notices out, but you can't make people come. Public comments on the workshops from those of you who attended. Susan?
I would just like to commend the staff and the consultants for the land use workshop and how they adapted it to incorporate the maps, which I thought was a really important aspect of the workshop. So the other comment I would make is I think that we may, and this is, water under the bridge now, but I do think if we had actively engaged the GPAC members to get the word out in a way that their members would respond to, that we could have had more participants in all of the workshops. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to do that, or we didn't do it.
Any other public comment? All right. Moving along to the pending changes. This is an informational thing. I just didn't know if you had heard of this.
Yeah, and I don't have too much to report on this, but I think it's just more of an opportunity for the steering committee to discuss in the public forum, given that you are 3 members and you can't really talk to each other outside of this venue, pursuant to the Brown Act.
I'm going to tell you.
So just for everyone's benefit, at the November 19th City Council meeting, Mayor or former Mayor, immediate past Mayor, former Mayor Will O'Neill asked for an A1 item. An A1 references a City Council policy that talks about the procedures for the City Council, where they may identify an item for a future agenda if there is a consensus from the Council to explore that item. And so at this time, the item that will be coming January 14th is a consideration to require reappointment for the GPAC and the steering committee at the first meeting in February annually. And so further discussion and consideration will be had at the January 14th meeting. I would invite you to attend and provide comments and input if you are concerned about that item. But that's about all I have to share at this time.
It's sort of an awkward, well, why would they do that? We're doing such a great job. The council will do what the council will do, but public comment?
Sorry. Can you hear me? Nope, that was not.
Just like that.
Oh, you did this one? Okay. It takes 2. Okay, there we go. So I'm wondering, in terms of our schedule, what does DUDEC propose? I mean, if this is going to happen in February, are we going to be done in March? Or are we going to be done in June? Or, I mean, this seems disruptive for people who have been involved in this all along and have all the background, and then to try and find 30 new bodies is going to be a challenge. So I'm just wondering how much we will have left to do at that point, and is there a recommendation that we can, or what are we going to say to the council? What do I say to individual council members when I'm talking to them?
we certainly, certain things have to be done by February, obviously. But we have a schedule which
It's the next agenda item.
we'll be
Madam
talking
Chair.
about in the next item. We're not going to be going on for another year, probably.
That's not the present intention, at least. That's correct.
So it is awkward. But it was proposed, and they want to discuss it at their January meeting. Jim?
Yeah, I would point, as Ben said, it has not happened yet, but if it were to happen, I think we should all be aware that the clerk has a policy of invalidating applications after 2 years. So I believe all the current members of both the steering committee and the GPAC, because we were appointed more than 2 years ago, our applications on file are probably no longer valid. And if the council went forward with this, I'm not understanding the timeline of it because they would have to appoint a new steering committee, and if the only thing they change is this aspect of it, the new steering committee would have to review the applications and make nominations to the city council, and it seems like there would be a gap of more than a month in there before there was any GPAC or steering committee if it actually happened as was proposed in the A1 item. Even more disruptive than it would seem.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I was surprised when I saw it, but it is council's ability that they can do that if they feel there's necessity. Obviously, something triggered this, whether it's just a concern that's been going on so long, and that the other committees have a certain period when they are reviewed, although not a year. But we will see. Chuck?
Hi, Chuck Fancher. Would it be appropriate for the steering committee to ask the two heads of the advisory committee to undertake a education campaign among their members, to go to council members and encourage them not to do this, that it would be disruptive, etc.? Do we need to get some discussion going with council members to try to stop this action?
My question is this an action or is this just a review?
Council did ask for a potential amendment to the GPAC and the steering committee. So the idea would be that there'll be a resolution for consideration at the January 14th council meeting. So they haven't committed to doing anything just yet, but the full discussion and potentially some of the logic behind it will come out at January 14th when the council discusses it in full.
Any other comments? I mean, I just, as I say, it does seem awkward if there were just to replace everyone. But they're aware of that. I mean, they have something in their minds, and I don't know that a big campaign is going to make a bit of difference, but certainly those who want to feel that they may not understand something or want to have clarification, please contact your council members. All right, and finally, review and next steps. And this is where I really, as I say, I really want to commend the members of the noise subcommittee, because what you're going to see, I'm hoping, we have some slides that we're going to see, some suggestions of, works in well. I don't know if it was quite the format that the DDEC people had, but as you've heard from them, they want, let's make it streamlined. Let's not have 780 pages that nobody reads. Let's have shorter, better, more easily read, with links to all the other information. And they brought in a couple of examples that has some items that I particularly felt like, wow, this could be really helpful, not only in looking at a general plan, but also in implementing it. So take it away.
And I'm actually going to lead this one off, Madam
All right.
Chair, and that's because I'm kind of a very sensitive person, and I appreciate reminiscing, and I think that in the spirit of the holidays, I want to look back at what was accomplished in 2024 by the steering committee and the GPAC, And while I was typing this up, I started thinking about the 12 days of Christmas, but I'm not going to attempt to provide a rendition of that at this time. But I think that the numbers are pretty telling in that it was a very productive year for the GPAC. I know there are some GPAC members and some very interested members of the public who are present who have been participating all along. And so I think as staff and a public servant, I just wanted to thank everyone for all the hard work this year and all the active participation. Kind of tying back into the community workshops, I will say, while we did only have maybe 1 or 2 new faces at the first 2 workshops, I wouldn't discount the 5 to 6 GPAC members who showed up because they naturally are the most interested in that topic. But I think that, again, the numbers are very telling. In particular, we've held a lot of meetings, conducted a lot of business. We have gone through 10 existing conditions and background analysis reports for the various topics and elements. I think, again, it's impressive. We've had 4 community workshops. We've gone through some restructuring where we had subcommittee chairs appointed for each subcommittee. And ultimately, we have 8 sets of ideas or potential goals that could support general plan elements, which will be further refined into a draft format that is goals and policies in the next step of the DUDEC work program. But again, just wanted to start with this and flash it for you all to digest because, again, I think that the GPAC and the steering committee and the community have been very productive in this effort.
Let's all applaud ourselves.
Yes. Here's a pat on the back. I'm guessing some of you would have wanted me to try to do 12 days of Christmas to this by this time, but I'll go ahead again. Decline. Maybe. I may or may not have sung it at my desk to see if it would have worked, but we'll go ahead and get into the meat of this presentation. And most of this, I think, as Chair Gardner put it, this sort of surfaced at the noise subcommittee meeting where we were talking about, what are the elements going to look like in terms of their structure? What's DUDEC's final deliverable? What are we sort of envisioning in terms of how this is going to be a very usable thing for the community, for the staff, for all users? And I thought it was important to have Elizabeth here. She doesn't typically attend the steering committee meetings, but I think that this is a very worthwhile topic because ultimately this informs the deliverable that the community and the steering committee and everyone gets at the end of the day. I think it was interesting that, I can't remember, Mr. Mosier had reviewed something like 24 different noise elements and picked out a couple that thought were worthwhile. And so I think that DUDEC's intention aligned well with those elements. And so Elizabeth is going to go through the structure that they had in mind and definitely look for the steering committee's feedback to ensure we're on the right track. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn over to Elizabeth.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. Elizabeth Dixon with DUDEC. So actually, the context that Ben gave on the previous slide is really good framing up for talking about the structure of the general plan itself and the format, because there are a lot of things that inform the format. And so one of those things that is informing the format itself and what we're proposing is based on the last year and a half of work that we've been doing with all of you. Thank you, Ben. And then beyond that, we need to make sure that we are addressing our state requirements because, as you know, the general plan is a state-mandated plan. And so I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a recap about those required topics. So we do have required topics of the general plan. That traditional structure is elements or chapters. So each of those topics tend to be an element. And then there are options or there's flexibility in terms of how we address those. So it could be that you are combining or renaming those elements even though you are still addressing them. And then you also have the option to incorporate additional elements that aren't mandated by the state that are specific for the community. So here's just a quick overview of what those required elements are, what the adopted general plan elements are today, and then what we're proposing here. So those required elements include land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, safety, and environmental justice when required. The adopted general plan includes all the required elements, with the exception of environmental justice, because that's a newer requirement. And in addition to that, there is the arts and cultural, harbor and bay, and historical resources elements. One thing I do want to note is we do have flexibility in renaming these elements and combining these elements, and the way the general plan is adopted today is that the conservation element is called natural resources, and then the open space requirements are met through both the natural resources and recreation elements. So it's kind of separated those two kind of requirements within open space into these two elements. And then what we've been hearing from the community and the GPAC, we've been hearing a desire to keep a standalone arts and cultural element. We've heard that there is desire to have the harbor and bay element be the harbor, bay, and beaches element. There's, of course, also desire to keep the historical resources element. There's been a lot of discussion, really, since we kicked off this project around sustainability, which we kind of evolved into talking more about resilience, which are really connected. And that's really going to be addressed across multiple elements as appropriate, primarily in safety and natural resources. And then in terms of environmental justice, this is really location specific. We previously went over that analysis. It's really a small area. A lot of the data that is showing environmental justice concerns is it's crossing borders with Costa Mesa. So we're actually proposing to address that within the land use element and have that be very location specific. All right, and then the other thing that we want to consider with the structure and the format of the general plan is we really want to think about who uses the general plan and how, because at the end of the day, we want to be sure that this is a plan that doesn't just sit on a shelf, but it's a plan that actually gets used over the next 25 years. So those primary users include your decision-making bodies and city staff. Your decision-making bodies use the general plan to guide their decisions. And city staff uses this to guide their recommendations. This is in the consideration of development applications, the capital improvements program, and the city's budget. And then beyond that, a secondary user is the broader community. And the broader community really looks to the general plan to provide that input to decision makers. So as they're using that to guide their decisions, community members may say, well, I went to the general plan and I saw these policies, and I think you need to consider these in your decision. And then also just to understand what those citywide values and direction are.
So I have a comment on this. On the very first one, it says City Council and Planning Commission. And that, to me, is what's wrong with the way we implement our general plan. It is the housing element and only those elements. So I'm wondering why it isn't the City Council and city commissions and committees, because we have an arts commission and we have an arts element. We have a PB&R and we have those elements. So it seems to me that by narrowing it we tend to, again, to get in this little narrow slot of just looking at that one element and ignoring the others.
If I may comment on that too, I think, I feel like you've made the comment before, Chair Gardner, about how the general plan really lives in the community development department when it has a more wide, broad sweeping reach at multiple departments. I think your comment is well put. I think this is today how the general plan is used here at the city. It focuses mostly on council and planning commission, and again, community development is seen as the keeper of the general plan. I think that's somewhat common across the board. But to your point, I think the intention of intentionally restructuring and making it more usable is to allow different departments to take more ownership. And I think we'll get into that more in the presentation, but I just want to let you know your comments well taken.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And yeah, ultimately what we're looking for is a much more accessible and user-friendly general plan. Let's see. All right, so getting on to that, structuring for effective use. So we do want to consider how the general plan is going to be utilized. so that we are making sure that we are tailoring the general plan in a manner that is easily utilized by those who need it the most. And so what we actually have proposed is an online general plan. And this is something that we discussed really at the kickoff and onset of this project with city staff, is having this online format of the general plan so that it is more accessible, but also looking at state-of-the-art, innovative, really future-thinking approaches. This doesn't mean that there won't be a hard copy of the general plan that could be printed at the end of the day, but this would just be the primary format. And so what an online format really does is it gives you a lot of capabilities in terms of searchability of the general plan. That's across elements. While the elements can be separate and you can look at an element on its own, you can also search across multiple elements at one time. And it can also link to things that take you a little bit deeper. So for instance, if you are interested in those background reports that give a lot of foundational information, you would be able to access that information if you choose to go into the weeds on things. But if you're not choosing to go into the weeds on things, you'll have that high level information accessible to you. And then also, we've heard a lot from all of you about kind of cross-cutting issues, cross-cutting themes, because the general plan is really interrelated. All of its elements are interrelated, and they are to be consistent with one another. And where we have topics like resilience, and even environmental justice, where we want to call out those policies, it gives us this opportunity to use these searchable icons, where if you say, okay, I want to look at only environmental justice policies, you can do a search for that. Or I want to see all of the resilience-related policies, it'll give you an option to search for that. So I want to walk you through, I'm going to walk you through a few examples, actually, but I want to walk you through an example of an online general plan that I think is really user-friendly, and I think that this scenario could apply for our purposes. So what you're looking at here, and I realize the image may be a little bit small, but in that top dark blue bar, what you're seeing, the text there, those are the names of the individual elements of the general plan. And this is showing where you can use that search term to pull up those applicable policies. And so you could use that search bar and it's going to show you what policies would apply to make it really searchable. Taking a deeper dive into that, if you were to click on one of those elements, it takes you to a high-level page that leads you to the element purpose and specific topics related to the elements. And then you can click to learn more. So if you learn more, that's where you're going to get an overview of this is what this element is. And when you go into each of these topics, that's where you're going to get access to a description of that topic, the goals related to that topic, and the policies related to that. And within this specific example, each of those policies are connected to an implementation program. So then I want to walk you through kind of a visual and an example that would apply to Newport Beach. So thinking in terms of going with that structure, you've got the element title, the purpose, the overview, you've got those topics. I want to give you an example as it relates to the safety element. So if we're starting with the safety element's purpose would be to address natural and human-caused hazards and the potential short and long-term risk to human life, property, and economic and social dislocation. The overview would consist of language similar to what's going on in Newport Beach. So Newport Beach is prone to a variety of natural and human-made disasters, including coastal hazards, seismic and geological hazards, flooding, fire, hazardous materials, aviation hazards, and extreme heat. And with that, that's where you would get into each of those element topics. So one such example would be coastal hazards. You would have descriptive language associated with that. So you would have really an intent of that topic. So it would really explain the types of coastal hazards that exist. And then you would have that supplemental information talking about the challenges in Newport Beach. You would have maps and descriptions of things like sea level rise, for example, that would get into that level of detail. And then following that is where you would have your goals, your policies, and then a connection to your implementation. So in this scenario, the example that I have is a community that is resilient to coastal flooding. A policy may be to prioritize nature-based solutions, such as living breakwaters and restored dune habitats as appropriate. And then the implementation with this would really be a review and revision of your local coastal program. So that's just one example of how that structure that we looked at starts to tier. And so I want to show you another example. Oh, actually, let me take you into implementation before I show you another example. So kind of building off this same example, right now you have a robust implementation program. And that robust implementation program would still apply. That would still apply because there's a lot of really important narrative and context in that. And one other thing to consider is that at this point in time, we are not updating the circulation element. And also at this point in time, we're not updating the noise element. So we have to be sure that we are maintaining that implementation program for that consistency with those elements. But supplementing that is what we see would be a really streamlined approach, which would be an implementation matrix. So taking that same example that we took, taking from the title of the element all the way through the goal to the implementation action, there would be a matrix connecting each policy. So you'd have the policy number, the policy itself, the implementation program, that's again connecting with the existing implementation program, a lead and potentially supporting department is something that we've discussed with city staff, having an estimated year, and then in some scenarios, some programs are always going to be ongoing, but that's where you can start to connect with each policy. Each of those actions, you're going to have a time frame associated with that. So that way, oftentimes you'll see, okay, you've got an implementation program, you've got all these policies tied to that implementation program. But if you're not connecting a time frame to each of those policies, then it could get a little bit muddied because there could be some scenarios where a policy would be ongoing. There could be some where there's a specific time frame. So that's where we would match it up with those specific policies.
Well, I particularly like the fact that you've included one of the things that caught my eye from the noise subcommittee, which is this is whose department that's responsible for it, because we have nothing like that in our current plan, and it's easy just to go, particularly when certain issues go over multiple elements. So I really like that inclusion. I thought.
Yeah, so I get a little fuzzy. So you say we have a robust implementation plan, but do you mean policies? Not so much plan in that, because I see, as Chair Gardner saying, it seems like in the past we have all these policies, but then we get into review. So it says review and revise coastal land use plan for consistency. Then you go to the years. Who's creating those things we're doing within each department? Are we clear on that in this plan?
I can provide some context. Committee Member Brown. So Elizabeth referenced the implementation program, which is not necessarily the policies of the general plan, rather the implementing actions on how those policies are achieved, right?
But are those specific?
Yes, but
So
they are
when
not.
you say review and revise coastal and you talk about prioritize nature-based solutions, there's a nature-based solution that's in there.
I think this takes it one step further, and I think to Chair Gardner's point, the thing that's missing is who's responsible. That's not in the implementation program today.
But a specific action is listed?
There are specific actions, yes, but there's no sense of priority in terms of when it should be accomplished. So we don't have this, 2025 to 2030 or near-term desire. Today, it's something that I think, and this kind of goes to the overarching concern of the implementation program not really being something that is being monitored closely, because a lot of things don't have timing and they're just sort of shelved, right? So I think what this is proposing to do is really make it clear who's accountable for this implementation action or implementation program piece, and what's the horizon? So when should we be tracking it? So the implementation program as it exists today does have specifics in it, but there's really no accountability had by department, and there's no timeline given. So it's kind of just been something that's, we'll pick and choose when that's appropriate and to prioritize.
Okay.
And
I have a question. So with regard to the implementation program, who is going to write that and when? Because if we're sunsetting the GPAC committees and subcommittees, how is this going to get done? Is this staff, or are we just going to take what was in the old general plan and move it to this one? We have some new policies that I don't think have been actually written as policies, much less have any implementation plan written for them. So how's all of this going to happen? Who's going to do this and when?
Yeah. I would look to, I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to address that or if you want me to take it first.
yeah, I
Just
think a
before
little.
you start, I think this is where we fell down our last time around, is that GPAC did the policies and we walked away, and the staff did the implementation program. But when we started to look at the general plan for this revision, I would say I'd find a policy that was important to me. I remembered, oh yeah, I remember this policy. And it would say implementation 5.1. I go, and it wouldn't, 5.1 would be talking about something else. So whether there is an informal review or whether at some point there's a proposal to the council that a group be formed to oversee, I don't know. But I do think that that's to leave it completely to staff is hard.
And I don't know, I don't want to speak ahead of Elizabeth, but I will. There's no intention that city staff will be taking this on our own. I wouldn't foresee cutting out any GPAC input on this or steering committee input on it, especially considering how important I know this is to the GPAC and to the steering committee in terms of its actual teeth and specificity, to where staff actually has something to look at and say, this says we're supposed to do it within this time horizon, so we're going to do it within that time horizon. We don't have that today.
This is just a suggestion that I think I've made previously. In order to really make it work, you need to put the responsibility in the city manager's hands, because along with planning the implementation, you need budget that goes along with it and the allocation of staff. So if you truly want to implement the general plan and the policies, it needs to fit into the running of the city with budget and staffing and city council authorization to do it.
Yeah, it has been suggested that there be a position at some point where sort of the overseer, so you don't try to break. So we do try to break down the silos, but that's down the road. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to give a little bit more context in terms of the implementation program itself. So in this scenario, while the implementation program, it provides the action, and that action is to update and revise the local coastal program. It's the policy itself that is guiding how that should take place. So that's where the policy comes in and provides that meat, because the general plan is at such a high level of planning. What we don't do in the general plan is we don't say, this is where you build nature-based solutions and when. So that is something that actually needs to be carried out in other avenues. And that first avenue would be through the local coastal program, because you're going to need that consistency with your local coastal program before that could be implemented. And then if you really think about the development process, after that, that's when funding is identified, that's when permits are pulled, and that's when actual construction takes place. So I think I just wanted to pull us out of that, like getting so specific in the implementation program. The specificity is actually through the guidance of the policy. The tool and the action that's carrying that out is the implementation program. Is that helpful?
It is. I have a hard time seeing, and you're using the term action, and so I'll use the term going from action to the actual task. Who's creating that actual task and implementing it? That's where I'm fuzzy.
Yeah, I'll just jump in again. I think in this scenario, there would be a lead department identified, and they would be charged with studying that further in terms of what that actually looks like. Part of the reason that you don't get so specific in the general plan is I think you'd be undergoing a significantly large California Environmental Quality Act review if you're trying to package all this together at the front. This would basically give a lead department the marching orders to study where nature-based solutions would be most appropriate through the revision of the coastal land use plan. And it would probably involve hiring on a consultant, doing a full-on study to identify the appropriate areas and carrying it out through that. So I think what this does is, as Elizabeth said, the policy sets the stage, and then the lead department is the lead actor in this case, taking on that task and implementing it through that separate process that's carried out, again, in support of the implementation program itself.
And do you feel like we do a good job of that?
I think today there's a lack of clarity in a lot of the implementation program. And again, I think that's why we don't have timeframes today that say this should be a near term. I mean, there are some instances where it says maybe this should be done sooner than later. But we don't have anything like this matrix that give clear marching orders. And just for context, this matrix was brought up from, I think it was the city of Long Beach, had a 100-something page noise element that Mr. Mosier pointed us to. And the matrix was set up just like this. It had near-term, mid-term, long-term, and ongoing. And that's exactly what I think we're proposing here. And this just gives us, again, more of a pecking order of what we should be doing and when. And we don't have that today.
Hi, Chuck Fancher again. Can you help me understand the bigger picture? I'm not sure when the steering committee and the advisory committee sunsets, if that is February, April, or the end of 25, or if it's not defined by the calendar but defined by work product. If it is near term, and I would like to know if these are 4 sets of goals, nicely done, and we have 8 or 10 elements. How many elements do we have?
In total?
In total, 10.
How many elements do you have in total? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7,
So
10 in total.
okay.
Yes.
So my question is, given our timeline, do we have the other 6 sets of goals that just aren't in front of us now? Is there a draft of the policies that will follow the goals that have been propagated by the advisory committee subcommittees and staff? And I do understand the implementation is really just identifying the actor and the program in which the policies will be implemented. It's not about doing the program, it's just identifying the actors. But where are we on the 10 sets of goals, 10 sets of policies in text?
So firstly, just to address the first question about timing, the way that the resolutions are that formed the GPAC and the steering committee, the way those are written is at the conclusion of the general plan update or earlier if decided by council. So I'm not aware of any intention to fully sunset the GPAC or steering committee. That would be a challenging thing for me as staff if I were to take this on all on my own, and your community input is very important, so I don't see that happening. So I think that through the entire project, that is the general plan update, we'll have a GPAC and a steering committee. At this time, we actually have ideas to support every element, and those are, in essence, potential goals that will be considered, and those are all posted online. I think I emailed them to you. I'd be happy to do that again. We have those ideas to support each element, and through the subcommittee review efforts and through the community workshops and the input that has been provided, DUDEC will be providing draft policies. So ultimately, staff, and we're kind of getting into the next steps through this, staff will receive draft goals and policies for first glance, and then we'll be working that through the GPAC and its subcommittees in early 2025. So they are forthcoming. They've not been written yet. But it is something that the GPAC will be heavily involved in along with its subcommittees. That's the intention.
Is that a 3-month timeline or a 6-month timeline?
I would say maybe 3 to 4 months is our ideal goal for that. Again, I think the challenge with this project is there's no real deadline to perform other than we have a contract with DUDEC that's finite. It's the end of 25. And we have a somewhat limited budget. We don't have unlimited resources for this, so we cannot draw it out to the end, to next year. If we needed to, we'd have to amend the contract and the budget at that time. So for now, we're marching forward with probably 3 to 4 months, and then we'll go from there to environmental and kind of further vetting with the community, and then ultimately public hearings in summer. And that's still the intention.
Thank you for that. To understand why I asked that question, what I am following is the work product to get to the point where there are the policies that I can react to and provide specific comments. And as Chair Gardner knows, and Nancy, I'm very much interested in how our city addresses our beaches and our coastal waters. And I'm looking to that product to then start responding and voicing suggestions. So that's why I asked the question. That's where I am looking to engage.
And just if I may add one more thing to that. So I'm going to go ahead and send you the link to the website. And what you can do is you can review all the ideas to support the elements and add your own Post-it notes. They're virtual, but they still have the same weight as if you're at a workshop. And I think you'll find that very fun, it sounds like. So I'd invite you to do that, and I'll send you the link after this meeting.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through another example, and this looks very busy, but I'm going to make it easy for you. So kind of connecting it back to what we just went through, what you see on the right is that same online general plan example. So we're getting to that deeper level. This is still the safety element. The topic in this scenario is coastal flooding. We've got this narrative text about the issues around coastal flooding. You'll actually see supporting maps on the bottom left that can be clicked on, and they enlarge, and then that's where you see the goals and policies plugging in. I wanted to show you this other example on the left, and this is from the city of San Diego, and I know that this example was brought to the city, and I just want to show you how this connects. So on the left, what you're seeing in the very top left corner, the hazard mitigation and disaster preparedness, that's actually a topic of the safety element, so similar structure that we're seeing here. However, the key thing that's different here is all of the goals for that topic are in that blue box there. So they put them all there. It's then followed by a high-level discussion and even getting into specific details on very specific topics. So right there on the right, you see that flood mitigation, and then they've grouped all those policies together. It's all all the pieces are there, no matter where you look. You're going to see all the pieces. We are recommending a structure where the policies follow the goals that they apply to, because we think that it provides a little more clarity on the intent overall. But beyond that, the meat is all the same. And in both of these scenarios, these are newer, updated general plans, and you're seeing a smaller narrative than what you see in the adopted general plan as it is today. So that's all I have. I did have to slide forward to remember if that's all I had.
Committee members, any other comments? Any thoughts before we go on? Public comment.
So I'd like to partially answer Chuck's question. The part that is proposed to be added, which is the responsible party and the timeline, would be overlaid over all the elements. we're just showing it, she's just showing it in this one, but the idea came from the noise element subcommittee, particularly Jim, and everybody jumped on that, and staff as well said, yeah, we'd like to know who's responsible. So, and in some cases, there may be commissions and committees that could be using that. It's not all planning commission and city council. Exactly right. That's my thinking.
Jim?
Yeah, thank you. I have several comments. First, regarding the streamlining and making our general plan more compact. At the workshops, the attendees have been told that our current general plan is 780 pages long. That actually is referring to a little flash drive copy that Ben prepared back in the early days of the Housing Element Advisory Committee. And since then, the housing element alone has grown to 588 pages. And if you were to print out our entire general plan, it would be over 1,000 pages. We've been told that the housing element is sacrosanct. So how are the 588 pages of the housing element going to be changed to this new format without upsetting the city council, who doesn't want to make any changes to our housing element? That's first comment. Second, kind of the last slide we saw, I think it was from the city of San Diego, was showing it had all the goals grouped together. And then instead of being under them, all the policies were in a separate section. And it kind of cross-referenced apparently what goal each policy supported. In reviewing the various noise elements that I looked at, I did notice in our own element and the others that there is a problem knowing what goal a particular policy should go under. And so the structure is a little confusing. Like if you had a policy proposing to investigate reducing roadway speed limits, that might support more than one goal, and it might support goals in multiple elements. And so we heard some idea here at the first that maybe things would have some kind of clickable icons next to them that would let you go from one to another. But I'm trying to look at the County of Ventura, and it looks to me like it's pretty much a traditional general plan that they've adopted. It has each element in a PDF form, and it has, as the more modern ones do, it has bookmarks in it. So from the table of contents, you can go to the different parts. And it does have the thing called the E-plan, E-general plan. I don't think that's the primary plan in the County of Ventura. I think that the traditional PDF version is that, and the E-plan looks to me like it's on my device. I don't think it works. So it may have to be on an actual computer to use it rather than a little tablet like this. And its purpose seems to be kind of to review the general plan rather than actually being the general plan. So I'm still a little confused here. I don't think their general plan is particularly brief. It looks like it's a big PDF file, warning, very large file if you download that. So I'm a little confused, as I often am. So is there an example of some city where actually it is in an E format primarily, and the printed out thing would just be an afterthought? And I'm particularly concerned if there, I think we heard, or I had the impression, and I told the noise subcommittee, and I think I'm wrong, that it was going to be kind of a hyperlinked thing, that the narrative would be short, but it would have hyperlinks to bigger documents somewhere. And I'm not quite hearing that here today. So I would like to see an electronic format, and I would like to see something that you could, if the policy was something about beaches, it would show all of the goals that was supporting. And likewise, if you looked at one of the goals, it would show all the policies you're supporting. I don't know if there is an example. Maybe it's just because my device, it doesn't work, but I don't know if the County of Ventura does that or not, or if there is an example. And one final note, when trying to find an electronic version, searching in Google, what I did find is that as a student project last year, UC Davis set up a database of all the general plans in California, which is searchable. It's something called the California General Plan Database Mapping Tool. And if you put in a keyword, it will go through all of the general plans in California, more than 500 of them. And it will give you a map showing which cities address the words that you're asking about. And you can click on that, and it will link to the element within that general plan that contains the phrase that you're looking for. However, all of those are PDF documents. So I think we need some more clarity on what this e-version is going to be and whether it's something new and innovative or actually already exists. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think you touched on some of this, but go ahead.
Yeah, and as I kind of described earlier, where you want to dive in a little bit deeper, you want to get into those weeds, that's where you'll have access to a lot of that supplemental information. So there's a lot of required analysis associated with the general plan, and that analysis has primarily been conducted in those background reports. So those background reports contain a lot of information that we do have to have. And while our primary goal is to have an online general plan, there would still be a hard version of the general plan that you could print out. But the online general plan, you'll still have access to all of those documents. You'll have links where you can click and you can follow that path. But it's putting the information, if you want just the quick story, up front for you to make it more accessible and more digestible.
Yeah, the executive summary. Thank you very much for those. I would say, as far as the land use element, the housing element, that we can simply suggest to the council that we have come up with a new format which is more readable and that sort of thing, and we feel that the housing element could be included in this format without changing any of the policies. And they can either say, fine, let's make it consistent, or they can have the housing element stay as it is. I mean, that's their decision. But I think we can make that. We can certainly do it without coming into any conflict with the state, because we wouldn't be changing anything but the way it was laid out.
We probably have to confirm that. Bureaucrats will be bureaucrats, but yes.
Oh, all right, I get that. Any other comments? Susan?
I definitely like the direction it's going in, and I think we'll end up with an excellent product coming out of Dudek and the staff's efforts here. I did want to go back to our earlier conversation and just make an observation about this A1 item that's going to be on the agenda. I think at some point we're going to be looking at lessons learned from this process and where we may have a need to look at the process that we've been through. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the first three elements, housing, land use, and circulation, were done without the benefit of the steering committee and the GPAC. Is that correct? Okay. So then the GPAC and the steering committee come into play, and there was an assumption that there would be no discussion on those earlier policies, that was a given. And I think that creates a challenge for anyone coming in we not only had the GPAC and the steering committee coming into the process, we also, out of no one's, just out of uncontrollable circumstances, also encountered a change in the consultant team. So if there was a problem, the problem was that, in my mind, that there was an assumption that you would be able to bring all these new people into the process and that they would just accept everything that had been done earlier, even though they weren't part of it. They didn't necessarily understand some of the decisions that were made, and that any challenges were viewed as not supporting the council's actions. And that's where the basic conflict is, I think. And it led to certain actions that continue to be a source of conflict and division. So, I mean, I think we know more than we're willing to talk about or accept or acknowledge, but that's where I think the conflict or the basic dilemma is. When it's water under the bridge now, but going forward, I mean, if there's any conversations with the city council members, at some point they should understand that's where it's coming from, because that is where it's coming from.
Certainly could be a summation at the end of saying, well, if we're going to do it over again, this is how we do it. Kimberly, do you have anything to say on that?
On this
No. Okay. All right. Any other public comments? Okay. Matters which you'd like to have on a future agenda, either of you? No?
No, I assume that the A1 will be on whatever next agenda
Yes.
that we've got, regardless. So.
Yes. If this is our last meeting, I've enjoyed it. Yes. So we'll see. All right. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.